Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited about the opportunity for me to learn from you all about William Faulkner and share with you a few of my thoughts about his literature. It was suggested it'd be nice if we make brief self-introductions, his name and why you're in the course, and move on. We don't. I'll start. My name's Bev Williams. I studied Faulkner in graduate school and became a great fan of his. And I taught for a dozen years or so before going into business. And so I'm always delighted to get back to an academic routine or setting. So, and my wife Louise and I live here in England. So, Sam?
Sam Van Nast. I'm in the course because I really enjoy Faulkner, but I never came across him in any of my schoolings. And so it's nice to have a guy to kind of elucidate things for me. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
I'm Suzanne Sanders. I have read a lot of Faulkner, but it was 100 million years ago, and I'm ready to do it again.
I'm Ann Rosenwald, and I don't remember reading Faulkner in high school or college, so I'm here to learn.
I'm Ray Ernest. I'm in the course because I just retired as an attorney and suddenly have time. So I did read light novels in college, but I remember it a little bit. So I'm also here, of course.
I'm Ern Lesser Half. I'm Beau Ernest. I'm a retired judge here in Talbot County. I don't know a lot about Faulkner. I am aware that I was always a great Hemingway fan, and they were about opposite ends of the spectrum from what I could see. And so I thought maybe I would have a better appreciation of Faulkner if I learned a little bit more about it.
Glad to have you here.
Hi, I'm Peggy Gunderman. I know little to nothing about Faulkner, but I so enjoyed the course on Hemingway, I decided I'd take Faulkner.
I'm Anna Harding, and I am here because I decided to do something this year that I didn't really want to do. I was a lit major and never cared much for Faulkner, so I'm here to maybe decide that it wasn't so bad as I recall.
I'm Tom Knight. I took a master's degree in English at Vanderbilt in the early 60s, so I was pretty deeply infused with all things Faulknerian at the time, and I've continued somewhat trying to keep up with some of the literature. And I have a deficit here. I'm blind, so it's very difficult for me to. I have readers, and my wife takes care of me as well, but it's sometimes reading Faulkner and having somebody read to you is slow progress. But I get it done. Delighted to be here.
Great. Thank you. Annabelle?
I'm Annabelle Lesher, and what little Faulkner I have read, I did on my own and a long time ago. And I remember just about nothing. So I thought it was time to upgrade a little bit.
Terrific.
You get your work cut out for you, young man.
Welcome to the challenge. I think that it might be helpful to.
We've got our Zoom people too.
Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you. Those on Zoom, please. I can't read from here. Can somebody start with
Lorraine
the
is
top
on the
left?
left. That's Lorraine. Unmute yourself, Lorraine. You're muted.
You're muted.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
My name's Lorraine Curry. Hopefully next week I can be with you. I've had some minor surgery recently, so I just really don't have a whole lot of energy at the moment. Thank God for Zoom. And I'm looking forward to learning something today.
Thanks.
Teresa down at the bottom.
Hey there, Teresa Schuster, coming from South Carolina. I am obsessed with Southern writers and obsessed with Faulkner. Love Flannery O'Connor, Eudora Welty, and never miss an opportunity to learn something about Faulkner. Thank you.
That-
That's it.
That's it.
And then Carla right here sent a message. Let me, oops, up there. Print it over here. It says, my name is Carla Todd, and I just want a better understanding of the writings.
Okay. So Faulkner, my mission in life is to convince many people that Faulkner is well worthwhile reading, and that there is a great part of his writings that's not so inaccessible and unintelligible as parts of Absalom, or The Sound and the Fury. And that there is a lot of humor. I'm also, as Bo was mentioning, I'm a big Hemingway fan too. I really like Hemingway. We had a Hemingway session somewhat like this a year or so ago. But greater distance between styles, I don't think we can encounter in English. The one rambling and the other one very terse, epigrammatic almost, writings with short words and short sentences. Anyway, so back to Faulkner, I thought it might be interesting to read part of his Stockholm address when he got the Nobel Prize for Literature for Fiction in 1950. It's very brief. You expect Faulkner to go on and on and on. He does. It's very brief, but I'll just read part of it. He begins, I feel that this award was not made to me as a man, but to my work, a life's work in the agony and sweat of the human spirit, not for glory and least of all for profit, but to create out of the materials of the human spirit something which did not exist before. So this award is mine only in trust. It will not be difficult to find a dedication for the money part of it, commensurate with the purpose and significance of its origin, but I would like to do the same with a claim too, by using this moment as a pinnacle from which I might be listened to by the young men and women already dedicated to the same anguish and trouble, among whom is already that one who will someday stand here where I'm standing. The rest of his address deals with the reasons for writing fiction, and it's an interesting brief one. But the one point that came out of this, well, there are two. The real writer, the dedicated writer, writes of grief. He writes of true love, of struggles, real struggles. But so many of the contemporary writers, we're talking 1950 now, already, he says the writing has suffered because, find here, the conscientious writer will write about love and honor and pity and pride and compassion and sacrifice. Until he does so, or she labors under a curse. He or she will write not of love, but of lust, of defeats in which nobody loses anything of value, of victories without hope, and worst of all, without pity or compassion. Those writers write not of love, but of the glands, he wrote later on. I was a pretty good singer. And he concluded by saying, I should have underlined this. I'll approximate it. He said the only thing worth writing about is the human heart in conflict with itself. And I think that's a good comment, really worthwhile comment, because as I think back reading some books that are well written and are exciting and they're just entertainment reading, it's not to put them down so much, but they don't have any depth to them. Every time I pick up a bestseller, by the time I get to the end, I'm so disappointed because there's nothing much to conclude. Even though the storyline may be very engaging, very good. I always like a good spy thriller or a detective, Mickey Spillane or Elmore Leonard, those writers. And it's not to say that they do not have skill in writing. So I don't think Faulkner was trying to be snobbish about it. He was just trying to address what he felt was really worthwhile, what really brought meaning into his life. Not just for, as he wrote, not just for the money. Okay, so I put together these two stories because A Rose for Emily, I think, is very accessible. It's not hard. It's easy to read, even though there are flashbacks and flash forwards. And there's a lot of that that's sort of confusing. And so I should have put in my little email, my caveat, don't worry about getting the chronology right. Just read through the story. Okay, so why did Faulkner write it that way? Well, he was very much interested in the storytelling process and in the way that stories get handed down generation to generation in the oral tradition and the passing on of the inculcation of values that come from brave deeds and lessons that come from scurrilous deeds or immoral deeds, mean-spirited deeds. And with the retelling of stories, we get into the embellishment of them by, forgetting details that may not be important or that may detract from what we the tellers, hope to pass on to those who are listening to us. So we then get into the myth-making process. The best example is, say, the King Arthur legend. I think most historians agree that there was somebody who existed who was like that, born at the monastery in Tintagel. If you've ever been there to see that, it's quite something. But over time, what has been distorted, we get Tennyson's Idylls of the King, you get Mallory's Morte d'Arthur, and you get finally that wonderful novel, The Once and Future King. I don't know if you've ever read that, but by T.H. White, which is the Arthurian legend, but told in contemporary English with lots of intended anachronisms in it. It's an easy read. It's not as thick, though. We used it in senior English one year at the school where I was working. So you get into the myth-making process, and that's what Faulkner was interested in. So as A Rose for Emily unfolds, who is telling the story? I'm asking you. Who's telling the story?
The town.
The town. Spokesperson for the town. Man, woman, doesn't matter. It's just the town speaking as a unit, like a chorus or something. And we know because it begins when Miss Emily Grierson died, the whole town turned out. The women for this, the men out of a duty or respectful duty, and the women out of curiosity to see the inside of her house. And it goes on from there, and then it's first person narration. Okay, so if you, any one of you or I are telling children, friends, grandchildren, a story about an actual event that happened, you might agree that at least if it's extemporaneous, if you're sitting at the dinner table or before the fireplace after dinner with a friend and so forth, let me tell you about the time we did this and such. We started out in Charlottesville and we were headed for a rugby tournament down there, but you got to know before that, we had bought this bus, and you go back and forth, and you got to get the background. And at times, I despair of ever getting to the real story when I'm listening to a friend who can't get past the preamble. I can think of two people in particular, good, very good close friends of mine. I asked to say, Richard, can we get past the preamble? You know, we want to get, so we don't need to know about somebody's great aunt who died in a tornado. We want to get on with the story here. So that's what Faulkner is mimicking the storytelling process. And so as if I'm telling an anecdote or an episode, a true life episode, something that I've experienced or heard about, I'm trying to make it significant for whoever's listening, at least interesting. Maybe it's funny, but if it's instructive, there'll be some other things that come out of it. But the background is necessary for certain kinds of understanding. We can get carried away with that, as I mentioned before. There'd be too much what I call exposition. Go at it like Genesis, Jesus, the son of Joseph, the son of, and he goes all the way back to Adam, I think, or maybe that's in Matthew, I can't remember. So we don't need to know all of that, but it's interesting to see the narrative consciousness go into certain kinds of detail in the way that that narrator does go into the detail. And so we first, as we begin, we know Emily Grierson's died, and that she was sort of a fallen monument, as the text reads. And so why was she a fallen monument? I mean, as we read through the story, we find that there's great respect for the Grierson family, but there's also some other stuff. Like what? Anybody want to volunteer?
What they didn't know.
What they didn't know. Yeah, there was so much we did not know about that family.
And they were accustomed to knowing everybody's business, but she was the mystery of that family.
Yes. And she would not be so pedestrian as to be involved in any business. We are the high and mighty Griersons. We're the aristocracy. We don't do that. We don't put numbers on our front porch so the post office can deliver mail. We don't do that. We don't need it. Everybody knows who we are. Here we are. And so it's a good point about it. Then there are others. And perhaps you remember sort of into the story a little bit halfway through when the word came out that Miss Emily had nothing left to her except the house. And then there was a comment that the town took some sort of smug pleasure in knowing that now she would feel the agony or the ecstasy of a penny more or less. And they were glad to see that the high and mighty Griersons had taken a step down. But do you think they're really glad?
I think not, because of the way that her part of town had declined. And as a result, her decline is like the whole town is going kind of down the chute.
And we don't have that model of culture, other things too, wealth, power, political clout, and so on, that was handed down from generation to generation by the landed gentry, which owned the plantations and the slaves and had all the power. So as that goes away, what are they left with?
The Grierson?
The town.
Oh,
As the old order vanishes, and that's symbolized by the advent of Homer Barron, who's not a Southerner, right? He's Yankee, right? He's going to come in and fix things for us poor Southerners. So there's a thread of that resentment that you can read about that existed, especially during Reconstruction, when there was big top-down central management forced onto the recalcitrant slave states. By the way, I'm not defending that. That was kind of the way it was. There was that issue, that problem there. With the reconstruction didn't go away until the Hayes came in, I think, right? They sort of made a deal because things weren't working. They had to get something else going here in order to revive the economy of the South, which is mostly agrarian, of course, but it was very much needed. All the crops and the livestock and the raising of that in warmer climates.
But he's brought in from the north for such a pedestrian job.
Yes,
Sidewalk, right?
With
with a good pun there, pedestrian job, yes.
unintended.
Very good. And he's very popular. I mean, he's a gregarious, outgoing type guy, even though he keeps insisting in his conversation he's not the marrying type. So we get warned about that even before he and Miss Emily begin to ride in the buggy every Sunday. And did you notice anything about when he directs the workmen who are under him? How he goes about directing those who are doing the shoveling and using the pickaxe?
Says they could hear him cuss them.
Yes,
And they also, but I thought it was interesting that they said he was a Yankee, a big, dark, ready man, like there was some implication of race there. The fact that they mentioned dark.
yeah, I noticed that. I didn't pay much attention to it because if he had had any discernible Negro features, this story wouldn't have happened.
I was thinking maybe Italian.
Yeah, it could be that.
Something that wasn't pure white Southern goodness, you know.
Yeah, something like, I think, yeah, that's the point where distinction to make. And he cussed the blacks, the slaves. And by the way, when I first did this little piece, I think was his name at the library, he said, you got to address the N-word question with this group right away. So I did, and you don't have to read it. There shouldn't be anything wrong with reading text, but there are sensitivities out there among us. And so when Faulkner uses the N-word, it is not William Faulkner, it's the characters using it. And so though that appears a lot of times, and there's a lot of, in his works, there's a lot of racial discrimination. But that's not Faulkner saying that it's okay. So I like to think that it's best to focus on the writing and not the personality of the writer necessarily, or the writer's even the writer's life. It may be interesting to note that when he was writing As I Lay Dying, he was in New York City and on one of his drunken sprees. He was out for 2 or 3 weeks and so on. But it has nothing to do with the book. And also Faulkner was very egalitarian. If you look, as you read through his books, his fiction, the most admirable characters are blacks and women. And the strongest of the strong are the black women. Like Dilsey in The Sound and the Fury. She has the last book. There are 4 books, there's 3 characters, each character telling a story. 3 men, and then there's Dilsey. And there are other examples of it throughout. I think we may find something admirable about Nancy in That Evening Sun, one of the last ones that we will read. Also, this is somewhat anecdotal, but when Faulkner came to the University of Virginia to be the writer in residence, this mid-50s, I can't remember exactly, 54, 56. Colgate Darden was president of the university, and he did not, the title of writer in residence was not conferred. And some have speculated that it was because Colgate W. Darden did not like the extent to which William Faulkner was very much in favor of equal rights for Negroes. And he was not out there, waving flags or leading all sorts of stuff, but he was very, very supportive of it and sympathetic for it. And probably in his own life, he probably used the N-word a lot growing up. He certainly heard it. And, he was born in 1897 in small town Podunk, Mississippi. I forgot the name of the town, but then Oxford was his home, for most of his life. His outlook, though, was very egalitarian and very empathetic. But I think, for me, when I read these stories, I don't read them I don't believe that he's sentimental. I think that's a detriment to any good work of fiction. If it's too sentimental, doesn't mean it has no sentiment, but to be sentimental and feeling sorry for this person or that person and all this, it's kind of detracting from purpose. That's just me. Couple quick things. You all interrupt me if I'm talking too much. Don't confuse the warning to me as I was beginning to study Faulkner, and I think Clem Brooks wrote this, or Malcolm Cowley, somebody who knows a lot more than I do. Do not confuse time and Faulkner with chronology. Time is Faulkner's metaphysic. It is his concern. When Faulkner believed, when we read his fiction, we see a lot of instances of people trapped in the past. They can't get out. Emily Grierson, great example, and we'll go into more detail on that shortly. The town, as Suzanne pointed out, the town, when the great high and mighty Griersons come down, then we all might stand there and cheer and jeer at them, but then we think, what do we do now? You remember in Forrest Gump, when he quit running marathons and all the groupies following him, one of them said, "Great, now what are we supposed to do?" This mindless following him. So Jean-Paul Sartre wrote a brief and very essay, very easy to understand. And he likened Faulkner's ethic about time, the use of time in the past, he illustrated as saying that for Faulkner's characters, there is no future. And he used this little example of someone seated on the front seat of a convertible, but on the backrest, looking backwards, looking out the back as the car moves forward this way, speeds forward this way. There's no future. Can't see any future. Out to the side, it's all confusion. It's just blur. You don't know what it is until it comes into perspective in the distance or in the past. Then you can say whether it's a horse or a donkey, or whether it's a maple tree or an oak, or a man or a woman, some figure that's just blurred and it comes together there. And so I thought that was very useful. And yet, it's not as though, and in Faulkner's Nobel Prize acceptance speech, he believes very much in the future of humanity. He's not pessimistic. I might be able to find, I'll look for that a little bit later, but he believes ultimately that man will prevail, that mankind will prevail and keep moving ahead, even as we move ahead eons, but he said something like, he will still hear man's puny voice objecting and fighting and struggling and carrying on. So for Faulkner, it's not as though we have no future, that everything is predetermined and everything is bad. But in his writing, that the notion that the characters don't seem to have much future is what much of it's all about. And that's perfectly legitimate, I think. I mean, there are people without a future.
Quick question. Right here, we just had a question posted from Cheryl.
Oh,
asking.
can you read it? I can't.
Sure. It says, after the class, can we get Bev to email the quote/author on time that you just read?
Yes.
Okay.
There are several things I need to do. I have offered no excuses for my dilatory stuff here, but I will send out the PDFs as best I can get them together on the other stories. And I'll be happy to send the Nobel Prize acceptance speech. And if I can find Sartre's essay, I can send that too in time. It's not long, it's a short, it's not one of the lengthy secondary source things. Yes,
The Easton Library has a CD of many of the stories we're going to talk about, and preface incorporates his speech, which is his voice patterns are very unusual.
yes, they are. I mean, you say would instead of work.
It just can drive, make your skin crawl. In the first sentence or two, he uses the word, we usually call it word, calls it wait.
Yeah. I hear that growing up in the deep south. I do that all the time.
But that's something worth doing. I'll be sure, I have it now, I'll be sure it tomorrow, so it'll be available. Easton Library.
There is, in one of the following sessions, I'll bring something else to read from a brief book called Mr. Faulkner and the University, when he was at the University of Virginia. And it's a compilation of stories, anecdotes about his time there. And one of the funniest ones is written by the literary critic Jean Stein, a woman who was one of his lovers. That's enough said for now. It's about his script writing for Hollywood and going to a site near New Orleans where they were going to make this film that they never made. But it's pretty funny to hear Faulkner tell about the goings on, better than from my trying to paraphrase it. Okay. So, Faulkner's view of the present, using my notes to read from a little bit, it's kind of like an MRI of the intellect with multiple myriad slices of reality, each one static, and then permeates Faulkner's writing, not just being stuck in the past and a sort of a metaphorical inability to move forward. Even as we go through the days and we get up and dress and go to work and come home and have dinner and talk with the family and sleep, we're moving forward in a sense, but it's kind of like this. And there are two kinds of time for Faulkner. There's the chronological time, which is time the destroyer of things. Time gets everything, and time everything will crumble. Gibraltar, Roman oak, Faulkner's and all. Ultimately, it will be gone. But there's time to fulfill it, which is more spiritual. A lot of spirituality in Faulkner's writing, not religious preaching or religious dogma so much as it is a spiritual awareness of a lot of things. You find that in the stories about when the McCaslins or the other families go out hunting, like as in The Bear. Read that, very much about that, and others, that's in Go Down Moses also. And the spiritual side of it, the identifying with nature and with things between and among people that are spiritual, like some ineffable sense of why you know that you like, or without articulating it, why you know that you like someone that you meet outside of your family, why you become a friend with someone, why you can tell or think you can tell right away, I'm going to like this person, or this looks like my kind of gal or my kind of guy. It's ineffable a lot of times, just you get a feeling about it that some of that person. And so that kind of spirituality is much a part of Faulkner's writing. And according to Douglas T. Day, Jr., who was the led the Faulkner seminar that I had to kiss up to get into. I wasn't qualified. He said, this is why Faulkner is so widely translated. He was, at the time, this is, I'm going back in 1975 and 6 when I was in graduate school. At the time, he was the most widely translated American author ever, by a long shot. And a large part of it was that he had great appeal to the Latin American communities. And the spirituality was a lot of part of it because, well, there's a lot of Catholic influence, a lot of spirituality in the Central and South American countries. I'm not saying that from my own experience because I haven't been there but once. But because of what I've read and studied and from what leading South American, Central American writers have said about William Faulkner. They like what they see, what they read. So to elucidate on that, was that Sarker's illustration? Does that make some sense? I mean, it's just a little paradigm that helps make sense out of what he's, because the confusion of the past comes into into identification and then meaning later on as we look back on it, whether it's the physical passing by a pasture with cows and horses in it, or if it's an event that we've experienced that we draw meaning from later on as we look back on it. So Faulkner, for Faulkner, an event, I'm just going to read a couple things, must be given definition that is recognized for what it is physically, or in the case of an utterance, what the referential theory of language would ascribe meaning to. This is a cup, right? This is a pen. And then you get into the vaguer terms, the conceptual terms like sin, democracy, evil, things that are not referentially concrete. But you've got to make some sense out of things in order to ascribe any kind of meaning to it. Otherwise, it's just sort of something that passes by. So the beholder then, in contemplation with all the epistemological tools at her disposal, his disposal, ascribes meaning. And so the order of the past is the order of the heart in a lot of ways for Faulkner. As we look back over things that were meaningful, especially, just start with family and your own growing up and your close friends and extended family, the things that are meaningful. I ascribe meaning to the time that my maternal grandmother spent reading books to me. Is that why I like literature? I think it has a lot to do with it because she loved it, and the stories that she chose to read to me were engaging, and there were, most of them, as I remember, there was a whole series of volumes called On the High Road to Adventure, and a lot of them were about Robert Louis Stevenson type stuff, pirates, vagabonds, and others about cowboys and cattle trails. So it makes it meaningful for me. I didn't mean to go on about myself here. I'm just trying to give an illustration. All right, so Faulkner devoted his professional writing career to trying to explain the South. To whom do you think he was trying to explain the South? No guesses?
To
himself.
Himself.
Yeah, I just have the feeling he was working it out as he went along.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right. And the Absalom, which follows The Sound and the Fury, but has one of the central figures, Quentin Compson, talking with his Yale undergraduate university roommate, a Canadian named Shreve. And the beginning of Absalom, Shreve says, "So explain the South to me." And he goes on to say something like, "Who lives there? And how do they live? And why are they even there? Why do they even live?" And the way the book develops with Quentin Compson, Southern aristocratic family, trying to explain it by telling a story of an actual person, actual in Faulkner's fiction. Entirely fictional, but for those characters, an actual person that existed in the dynasty of Thomas Sutton, someone who came into the community, and his illegitimate son who falls in love with, unknowingly, with his own half-sister. So there are themes of incest running through it. There's the familial obligations, and he's trying to tell the story. And as the story goes along, he'll back up and move forward in the flow of time, the flashbacks. And then later on, Shreve jumps in and starts to tell the story as if to say, oh yeah, I get it. And then, so Charles Bond, he probably does this and this and that, and then because of this and this, and he goes on and on. So he gets involved in the telling of the story in order to, it's kind of humorous in a way, in order to help make sense out of it. So at the end of the story, anybody mind if I tell you about the end of this? This is not a drama about who gets killed or anything, but at the end of the story, when Quentin is telling the story, then Shreve turns to him and says something like, okay, well, so why do you hate it? Why do you hate the South? And the closing line is something like this to himself, Quentin, I don't hate it. 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 End of story, end of novel. Bring judgment on himself right away. Too much denial. So for Faulkner, there was a love-hate with the South. I mean, he has his family and his forebears, and there are many things that can be said positive about Southern culture. There are many things that are not things to be proud of. And it's not just slavery, it's a lot of other stuff too. The oppressed yeoman farmer, white trash, and what chance they had. Did they have any chance? Well, in the agrarian society, which is sort of a hangover from feudalism, there wasn't much chance for anybody to advance unless, like some of the Snopes family, they were really perniciously evil people, driven to take advantage of people where they couldn't get ahead. That was what they were driven to. It made me think about what I read once about Theodore Dreiser's characters at the turn of the century, like Sister Carrie and An American Tragedy, where the critic that was on there said these characters are being bandied about, blown about by huge, strong winds and forces of which they are only vaguely aware, like economic failure, or war, or pestilence, famine, drought, things that that we can't control. And that's a pretty pessimistic view, I think, that nobody can do anything about anything. I don't think we find that in Faulkner. By the way, since Bo, yes, ma'am.
You said that Faulkner has a love-hate relationship with the South. I told you I haven't read much Faulkner, though I remember very little, like in August. But I only saw the hate in these two stories. Does he also demonstrate admiration for Southern culture? Because I didn't see it in these.
Let's see, Go ahead, Mark.
He tells stories like a Southerner. He loves their way of meandering through a story.
There's that. There was, I thought, quick off the cuff thought, I think it would be a mistake to look for Faulkner to be adoring Southern culture in any way. I think what he does is show what it is. And I can make my own judgment about it. It's not important, after all, what the author thinks about it. It's what's important that comes out of the story. And I can see how you would come away without much there, and I guess I was disobeying my cardinal rule. I was thinking about Faulkner, the man, instead of his stories, because I mean, he had great affection for his family. And he loved it. He was not a faithful husband, but he was dedicated to his wife in his own way and his children. But I think to look for the extolling of virtue in Southern culture in his literature, you won't find it particularized for Southern culture, but you will find it in those characters who show courage, who suffer, who get through suffering, who deal with their situations in an admirable way, who accept things. And there are a lot of people who don't. There are a lot of characters who are not admirable. I think that was the message. So is that good enough? It was a good point to make, though. I hadn't thought about it in that particular way. I just sort of accepted that what came out of our graduate school doctoral seminar was that there was this dedication. I mean, he didn't move away, he didn't leave the South, he didn't become an expatriate like some may do. Famous expatriates who were writing in Paris, along with all the frauds and pretenders who were over there. Faulkner, incidentally, he tried Paris and he came back after a couple of weeks or a month. Then he tried New Orleans, and it was too rich for him because he had to get back, to get purity of thought, he had to get back to what he knew best, which was Mississippi, the Delta country of Mississippi. Shut everything else out so he could write about those items and those characters, people who were meaningful. Incidentally, you don't, I think, find any humor in Hemingway. There are very few things that he got unless it's gallows humor. With soldiers on the front or something like that, trying to scoff at or spit in the eye of death. But you don't find the belly slapping humor that you do in so much of Faulkner. Let me just throw this up, and I'm talking too much. And we have 45 more minutes. So I've got a lot of thoughts about A Rose for Emily. Did the story hold together for you? Was it a story worth reading? Did it make sense?
Absolutely.
It's okay if it didn't. How about the clench your hand? You like that?
It made me think of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho.
Yeah.
What if he had consciously or otherwise drawn on this very story?
Mm-hmm. And I think this is the most nearly perfect short story in America. It's just me. I just can't get enough of it. And there's so much in it, and the themes and the motifs that he uses and things that are important. I'm sorry, I thought I had this cut off. The themes and motifs that are important to him, like people trapped in their past, the idea of past entrapment, the idea of strength of family forebears, family traditions and heritage, the value of ritual. There is a great value to ritual. Ritual is a way of, in one sense, is a way of bringing meaning into one's life, whether it's religious ritual or whether it's a ritual, say on the football field or the lacrosse field, or a ritual like that. What's his name, that tennis player that's so idiosyncratic? He does this, what's it, Nadal? Whether it's something that gets him gets his mind set in the right direction. Or like in my own time in undergraduate school, who was that Carolina basketball player named Cunningham, Kangaroo Cunningham, who always wore the same pair of sweat socks falling down around his ankles. He wore the same pair every game. He washed them, but he was superstitious. So bringing a ritual into one's life can bring meaning, and yet there is a limit to that, isn't there? Because pretty soon, if you live by too much ritual, it becomes rote. Living by rote and meaning is lost. It's gone. And that is a lot of what afflicts Emily Grierson and her family, I think. She cannot get outside of her past and her heritage. She tries. Do you remember? Can you point to a couple of little things that show that she was trying to get into the real world?
She was seeing Homer.
Right?
Yeah.
Homer Barron,
China painting.
the China painting. She had her hair cut, came back. The little things that show, but in a sense, it's kind of pathetic, really. She was trying, she was doing what, as I see it, what she thought she might do to make some sort of progress into the real world, but she just couldn't get there. Even the China painting, I mean, that was moribund when she was doing it. And as the narrator Costa said later on, something about, well, the generation grew up and their children were no longer interested, and so there was no more China painting for her, so she lost that touch.
I think one of the most fascinating things that I'm sure will come up before we're done, at least I dwell on it, so much being made of the gift to Homer of the embossed brush and comb set, which was clearly very expensive. And it comes up frequently, as I recall.
Yeah.
And I'd like to have somebody explain to me a little bit more about that.
Can we have that repeated for those of us in the virtual?
The significance of the gift that she gives to Homer, consisting of a very expensive hairbrush and comb, silver, I believe, which is embossed with his initials.
Mm-hmm.
Very elegant gesture for somebody who's given to somebody who's not an elegant person.
I think that speaks to Bev's point that Emily did make an attempt after the summer after her father's death to join the society in some sort of manner, but she wasn't ever able to successfully do it. She got her hair cut. She accepted this northerner as a companion, despite the town looking down on her for having done so. I don't know if it's because he was a northerner or if it was because the town was left to speculate on the nature of their relationship. But she did, Bev's right, like she did absolutely try. And also to his other point about the time and maybe technology and the duty, this time when I reread this phrase of the strained flag, when Emily goes to get the arsenic and the pharmacist wants to know what she needs to use it for, and she just stared up at him and her neck or her face looked like a strained flag, strained being stretched to the point of almost tearing, and flag being that tradition and culture, loyalty to your city or state. And then, yeah, that's it.
So when did she buy the set? Do we know exactly when she bought that set?
It wasn't clear to me that she ever gave any of the things to her boyfriend, because I think the chronology is such that she could very well have poisoned him first, and then bought these things, including the nice set of clothes, and solely to accompany the body that this mausoleum that she prepared in the bedroom on the second floor. There's all that stuff sitting there all neatly folded, and so it may have been nothing more than her attempt to bizarre and twisted as it was, to convince the world that the guy that she had taken as her mate, her beloved, was a guy of good taste. He had these nice silver combs and brushes and nice clothes and nice shoes. And but I don't think it's clear that she ever delivered those things.
I thought she bought it as a morning after the wedding gift, which used to be a thing where the wife and the husband would give each other a gift the next morning.
Mhm.
And it was usually something that was personal, like a hairbrush, and often something that was expensive and had their name on it. And I think she bought it thinking, oh, he's going to marry me and you know, I'll give him this the next morning, and it didn't pan out. And then I think that's where the arsenic came in.
There's one paragraph, and I can't remember where in the story it occurs, that he comes in the back door very significantly.
After Dad dies.
That's the last time he's seen. That's the last time anyone visually sees Homer Barron, is after the two cousins, her two Alabama cousins, leave Jefferson, and then Homer Barron comes back. He slips through the back door at night and no one sees him again. But she bought that hair and brush set excuse me, during their courting phase. Because I don't think that she was in touch with reality. Clearly she wasn't. She didn't pay her taxes. She insisted that Colonel Sartoris was going to take care of her taxes. When her father died, she, for 3 days, refused to let anyone come into the house to remove his body.
Yeah, and she even denied that he was dead.
Mhm.
He finally broke down and they buried it very quickly.
You have some
Well-
people on chat.
I have one.
You have some people on the chat.
The chat overall, on the chat, monitoring it, it was about the resources we were talking about earlier. It was just follow-ups to that for the group.
I'm not sure what it is you wanted me to do.
The chat thing at the bottom, the people will send you comments or questions.
How do I see them?
You're by the
So-
phone, right? Justin will
Yes,
click on it for
so the
you.
problem is with the one TV, the chat comes over here, and that, let me move it over to the side.
But Justin's not in here.
There they are. So now I can't read them from here.
See if that will help.
Teresa likes Rose Forever.
Yeah, I see that.
She's listening.
Okay, well,
Sorry.
please interrupt if I'm missing something, if something that comes up that somebody's not.
I sent a message out to everybody saying the easiest thing is to please interrupt, to go ahead when you, because the chat, with it being on the one TV, it's being hidden on the side without,
Yeah.
it has to constantly be pulled up.
That's why I've been chiming in after he sent that message telling us to just unmute and jump in. But the important Faulkner's audio archives at UVA, that's the link that I put in the chat.
Oh, thanks.
And then there is, if you go to Charlottesville, there are recordings that you can hear. His actual voice as Thomas saying. Okay, so where were we? Let's, I suggest you might look for decay, decrepitude, even putrescence imagery in this. And did you notice that there is almost no use of color?
Yeah, I wasn't gonna bring up that point. And I think you said it in the email even, that it seems like the story is told in black and white. What does that mean?
Well, I don't know. I have an idea. It's somebody else. What's the use of having, just all, everything black and white? Let's put What's the thematic significance of that?
There were two references to color. One, of course, rose in the bedroom itself, the
Right.
light shades and yellow came up a few
Right.
times. The
Gloves.
wheels, the gloves, and the pillow as she was
Yeah.
on her bed. So those were the two color
And the
references.
gray Confederate uniforms of the mourners who showed up at her funeral in their old uniforms.
Yeah, military stuff.
So seems to me that for Emily, most things were black and white.
Or
It
gray.
was all one way or all the other. Even gray. I mean, I don't think she had much imagination. We don't know. I mean, we don't know what went on when she closed the door to her house and all that. We'll never know. So.
Oh, we know some of them.
She, when Faulkner titled the story "A Rose for Emily," why do you do that? There's no mention of roses in here, is there?
Well, the colors in her bed, in that bedroom, and her fiance or whoever he was were rose. They mentioned the word rose in that room.
And I think that was her rose. She made her rose, but
It meant love or something.
yeah,
Well,
by
it's
his long
it's the
intent.
paean by a town. That's the rose.
Say that again?
I think the rose is the paean town brings to her upon her death.
Maybe the town
The respect.
recognizes it too.
That or some sort of tribute to a fallen monument,
Yes,
to someone whom they had a respect or from afar. There was not much personal involvement from afar. And so a rose for Emily might be, I think, a tribute to her from the town. So why does the town want to give a tribute to somebody that they sort of stood afar from and stood and respected a great deal, but respected because that was the way it had always been? And so why didn't the druggist say, look, sorry, I ain't selling you this arsenic unless you give me a reading and write it down there? Why did you do that? Why did he do that? You know, he set it out there with the busboy or whatever they call it. The clerk. He didn't show again. And what did he write on it?
For rats.
Rats.
she said rats, right? Rats.
Oh, rats. Who got poisoned? They're a big rat.
I think that he sold her the arsenic because she was an elder and in his position as a pharmacist, he was a young man, so he was going to respect her and trust that she was doing the right thing. It's part of the Southern culture, if you will, a much higher respect for people who are older than you.
Yes.
Power of her stare, that power that came to her through her aristocratic background. But
Yes.
Still receives the respect or the receiving.
She's very, very dismissive of the rules and regulations by which all the rest of us have to live. I mean, you want to live that way, that's fine. I'm not doing it. I want arsenic. And you dare to ask me? Stared him down until he went back and got it because he couldn't figure out a way. In sort of the same way, not the same way, but sort of parallel to what Judge Stevens, I think that's his name, right? What Judge Stevens says to the younger generation guy, says, well, you know, just give her an order, give her a right. If she don't comply, why then? He cut it off and he said at some point in there, something like, damn it, man, will you have me tell a woman to her face that she smells bad? It was unthinkable. Yes, sir.
Getting back to the question you raised a few minutes ago about why would the town pay tribute to this woman? I think, the answer to that may be that it was really paying tribute to a way of life that she represented that was gone with the wind. And that may be Faulkner's way of addressing the question about what he appreciated in the South. There, like the townspeople perhaps appreciated what she represented, even though they, on the one hand, they criticized her for being too high and mighty and not one of them. On the other hand, they seemed that this was the last house in the neighborhood that was sort of a vestige of the past when things were better. And that may be why the town would even show up at her funeral.
But it might also be just that it was the habit for the lower classes to respect or show respect for the upper class. And there was a lot, they said the women were just there to see what was in her house. And I didn't get the feeling that they were respecting her so much as just tradition, agreeing with the tradition, or obeying the tradition.
You think Faulkner being misogynistic here, so that's what you girls do?
Yeah.
Well, he also said that only a woman would believe
Yes.
story.
Yeah, about the taxes.
Yeah.
Well, that was couched first. It was prefaced with only someone of Colonel Sartoris's generation could have created an excuse, a reason like that for her to not have to pay taxes, but that only a woman would believe. But a woman at that time would be inclined to believe it because she's not responsible for financial dealings in her household. She's not balancing a checkbook. So I don't know that it would.
They're not involved, they're not employed in business. They're not going to work at the power company or at the department store. They don't do that. Those who do work are going to be working in the fields. Most of them. I mean, there are some, but they're certainly not going to be Miss Emily's ilk that do that. And so I can't read the name, ma'am. Is it Cheryl?
Cheryl.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So I completely agree. I mean, Cheryl pointed that out. The interesting, I think this is interesting. We were talking about the house. Only Miss Emily's house was left, lifting its stubborn and coquettish decay above the cotton wagons and the gasoline pumps. An eyesore among eyesores. What does coquettish mean? Why do you use that?
Well, a lady doesn't do that sort of thing like painting or repairing,
Right.
so
And
it's gonna look run down.
and let's say a teenage girl or a college age girl being coquettish, what's she doing?
Learning.
Okay. But flirting, but in an innocent sort of way, but in a sort of one of these, right?
Yes.
Yeah, well, like that. And so there's the house, still beckoning in its decrepitude and its decay, still beckoning because of what it stood for, stands for, and had always stood for, as Bo was pointing out.
The dust swirled around literally when people walked around and sat inside this tomb-like home.
It had been utterly undisturbed, static,
There's a
stasis.
There's a phrase in there that I'm curious about, maybe you guys can help me with. Alive, Miss Emily had been a tradition, a duty, and a care. I lived in the South for a little while, and I remember people calling certain people, oh, she's a care. And I think the meaning is something like, that's somebody that takes a little bit more mental effort, or there's something going on there that we can't talk about or we can't quite nail down, but I'm not entirely sure. But there's something about that phrase. Does anybody else live down south who can help me with that?
I live down south, but I don't remember ever hearing that.
Yeah, it was usually older women, but occasionally it would be like high-spirited teenage girls would be called a care. So I'm not sure exactly what he's saying.
I think it's the opposite.
Take care with.
No, it's not taking care with, it's like, they take more energy. They take more mental energy, they take more emotional energy.
Well, look at the order of the words. First, she's a tradition. That's a strong, that's a strong force, being a tradition. That doesn't die easy. Secondly, duty, even worse. I mean, even stronger, even more obligation on our part. And then finally, a care. We were obligated, we had to take care of her in some way. We had to indulge her, we had to put up with her, we had to stay away from her since she wanted us to stay away. We couldn't intrude, but we had to take care. That's not exactly an explanation, but it's a hopeful effort.
Interesting little use of the phrase there.
I knew this was going to happen with this story. I can't leave it alone. But trying to move along, if we get,
One other
yes,
question about that story.
yes, Al?
I was trying to place it in time. When is this story set?
99, roughly.
I was thinking first decade of the 20th century.
That, yeah, 1910,
Yeah, the rustling of silks. Now, they weren't wearing those by the 20s.
right.
Well, they were still driving horses and buggies.
Yeah. Okay.
But they had filling stations, they had gas stations, cotton gin.
Yeah, that's right.
And the
So-
taxes were given in 1894, so it can't have been too much later, within a decade.
Okay.
That might explain the yellow gloves, because of Oscar Wilde's comments about, what sort of men wore yellow gloves.
Oh, I don't know that one. What's that?
Well, basically, it was considered like an underground sign that someone was gay.
Oh, really?
And so,
I've never heard that.
And it said he liked men.
I was gonna say, am I the only one
He
that
wasn't
picked
the
up
marrying
on that?
kind.
But more than that, he liked men and he liked to drink with young men and the Elks Club. So.
Me too.
I
That's
think
straight.
the yellow glove was just the last, okay, did you get it? Okay, let me
Absolutely.
make it clear
Yeah.
for people of that time period. They
I
would
bet you
think,
Faulkner's playing with us on that one. He probably knew that thing for a while.
Oh, yeah, he probably did, that's what I'm thinking.
But that's really interesting. It's creepy.
That's extra credit right there.
But I think, I would bet that's Faulkner playing with us a little bit
Yeah.
because there's nothing in there to indicate that Homer Barron was
Not anything.
surreptitiously. I mean, he sneaks in the back door to go be with Emily again. But I don't think the story is asking us to decide anything about that issue, whether he's straight or gay or bi or anything. I mean, it's completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
Or whether Miss Emily is. And,
She'd already bought the poison
right.
before he came back. I think that's called premeditated murder.
That's it.
And she just look at you
Yeah,
and
she
stare.
just stared. She was ready for him.
Did she buy the poison first or the silver grooming set first?
Bought the poison first.
The poison's first. I couldn't remember.
I was just looking at it.
It jumps around in time, but there's a website called Digital Yoknapatawpha, and they work with like chronologizing, putting the timeline in order, and it's like official. It's massive. Bev can speak to the legitimacy and resourcefulness of this website, I'm sure.
Yeah, Cheryl, what's the name of the website?
Digital
Yeah.
Yoknapatawpha. And you can also hear, on the Faulkner UVA archives, you can hear him spelling Yoknapatawpha. It's pretty cool.
I think it risks impoverishing this story if you try to figure out everything about the time, because that chronological time is not very important in the thematic significance of what's going on here. The confusion of time is important, but I don't think it's important for me to set down exactly when this happened and when that and so forth and so on. just me. But, I don't like bringing an author's experience, any author's experience into the reading of a work of fiction, but that's just me. The Geneva School of Criticism would disagree with me. They're all about figuring out what kind of mentality could write this kind of novel. I mean, what value is that to the novel itself? I mean, it could be very, very interesting, intriguing, what Faulkner was doing, what Hemingway was doing when he did this. Where was Zelda when F. Scott Fitzgerald was writing this, that, and the other, was she in the asylum yet? And how did that affect what he's writing? But you got to, I think, try to be pure about it, to come back to the text always, to look at what's contained in the text. There is one really, but one really beautiful sentence in here that I would like you to indulge me. This is in the beginning of part 5. When she has died, two big female kids, cousins came at once. They held a funeral on the second day of the whole town coming to look at Miss Emily Biggs' massive bought flowers. With the crayon face of her father musing profoundly above the bier, always in control, always overseeing her, always limiting what she could do. And the ladies, sibilant and macabre. Now this, and the very old men, some in their brushed Confederate uniforms, on the porch and the lawn, talking of Miss Emily as if she had been a contemporary of theirs, believing that they had danced with her and courted her, perhaps confusing time with this mathematical progression. As the old do, here's the singer, to whom the past is not a diminishing road, but instead a huge meadow which no winter ever quite touches, divided from them now by the narrow bottleneck of the most recent decade of years. Isn't that good? That's just a great, great image. I had a thought. There you go.
Don't know that.
I don't know. I mean, I've indulged my own desires here. We haven't hit was at all. We've done only about 10 minutes, so we could agree to come back to it. Maybe we just got to leave this alone and quit. And I've got to stop trying to beat this story to death. I just think it's such a great story. I mean, there's so much, I mean, in that cliche about every word having to count in good fiction, quality fiction, every word has a place and every character, and they don't just sort of come in and go like just to fill up space. I think that's why, for me, it's the most nearly perfect story I could have imagined. Now, when I juxtaposed was with this, I was thinking that because that deals also with people trapped in their past, in their rituals and what they have to do. There's a ritualistic way in which Uncle Buck and Uncle Buddy think that Tommy's turtle has to be pursued. And it's a ritual, it's a game, it happens all the time. And then they'll run over there and they'll find him, or they won't find him, bring him back. And is it Uncle Buck that goes? Yeah, it's Uncle Buck that goes over. And Safonsa has always got her eye on Uncle Buck, wants him to marry her and all that. And so when he goes over to Warwick, ironically named because it's a dilapidated, old, run-down former plantation house that Safonsa wants to dignify by calling it Warwick, and all her quaint ways of addressing Uncle Buck and the others. So when Uncle Buck goes running out of the house, beginning of the story, what does he grab? As he's going out. He grabbed a necktie.
Yeah.
Why? A necktie. You're going to get on a horse and they're going to chase down some runaway slave. What do you need a necktie for?
And they said that's all you ever read.
Yeah.
Well, I thought it was something to do with the women, though, that there was about women.
Do you think so?
Yeah, because he's going to see.
He can't be seen without a necktie if he's going to be with Miss Safasova anywhere. As standoffish as he's trying to be. As things turn out, they do marry. We find out later on another fiction, they do marry, and the offspring is the narrative consciousness in here, which is, a friend of mine asked me if this is what I had when William Faulkner was at the university. This was not something participated in or even seen by himself, but by his elder cousin, McCaslin Edmonds. So we see the story through McCaslin Edmonds' eyes, and he becomes later in Faulkner's writings, Old Cass Edmonds. But himself is Isaac McCaslin, Uncle Ike, who is the offspring of Uncle Buck and Safasova. So Isaac McCaslin cannot experience that. As it goes on, say later on, this is Go Down Moses, copy of Go Down Moses, which has Pantaloon in Black and the Fire in the Hearth in it, along with the bear and some other well-known stories. So the beginning in medias res, there's confusion. Okay, here we are in the present, everything's confused. So I'm suggesting that thematically Faulkner was doing it so that we, the readers, would have to deal with a little bit of confusion because we don't know what's going on. Who else doesn't know what's going on in the greater sense of things? Uncle Buck and Uncle Buddy and the narrator, they don't know what's going on. They know Tommy's turtle is run, they know what they have to do because that's the way it is. We run, we do this, we do that, we grab a necktie. We go, why do they keep a fox in the house? What are they doing there? And why do the former slaves, the Negroes, live in the big house, and Uncle Buck and Uncle Buddy live in the slave quarters? What's going on there? There's just all this topsy-turvy reversal. It doesn't make much sense. And they lock the black folks in the big house at night and put a lock on the door, but what happens? Does the lock keep them in?
They slip out. They slip out every night.
They just go and go courting or drinking or whatever it is. But there's a ritual there. They all gather, go in the house. Yeah, Uncle Buck and Uncle Buddy, they're gonna lock the door now. And we're out of here. Just let them do what they want. We'll keep peace with them. They know what we're doing, but we don't have to admit it. Nobody has to admit to that kind of factual truth.
It'd be interesting to calculate the amount of alcohol that is consumed at the end of that story.
Yeah. There's a lot of alcohol in Hemingway, sort of ritualistic. In Faulkner, there's less of it. There's stuff here. Again, so this is what we do when Uncle Buck comes to call on Hubert. As possible, when they get over there, they play cards and they have drinks. And Safasova comes up to sweeten his hobby by taking a sip, right?
Yeah.
I thought that was hilarious. She likes to sweeten. So there we are. And Hubert and Safasova are also like Buck and Buddy. The vestigial elements of the vanishing aristocratic landowning society. And there's the reversal of roles there. So who's in control is sort of interesting. They go, the narrator catches up with Turl, which is Terrell, right? Pronounced Turl, but his name is Terrell. I'll bring it next time. I've got the genealogy lined out. I'll send that to you. Show the genealogy because there's a lot of mixed race blood throughout this whole society. Anybody ever read the Reavers, Faulkner? Or see the film? The film came out in the late '60s with Steve McQueen and
What is it again?
Burgess, the Reavers, Rievers. It was his last novel, and it's pretty funny. It's a funny one. Boone Hagenbeck and Lucius Quintus Carruthers McCaslin, who's about 11 years old, borrowing grandfather's new automobile about 1904, or whatever it was, some Phaeton or some flexible or something, and they drive to see his girlfriend who works in a brothel in Memphis, and it's all the misadventures that go on. So why was I going on about that? It's just that the juxtaposition of the power structure between the races often happens. Dilsey and the Sound of the Fury is much more in control of what goes on in that family than any of the rest of them are. They're all just awakes, including Mr. Conson and Mrs. Conson, one of the worst people ever. Just a terrible, complaining, whiny, vituperative, worthless, aristocratic woman. She just doesn't get anything much done. And in the Reavers, Ned, the African-American guy who stows away in the car and surprises them because he wants to go up and have fun too, is very much in control of everything that goes on in that story. Here in Woz, Tommy's turtle, I think, really is controlling all the events, because if he doesn't run off, we don't have any story. And if he doesn't run off, then ultimately Uncle Buck and Sfonso are not going to get married. Why did they get married? What happens that if you're thinking about it shows that he's going to have to get married? What is it in this story that if we think about it or imagine a little bit would make it a requirement that he's going to have to marry Sfonso?
Oh, he just called her dead without his pants on.
Yes.
But that.
Well, I think, yeah, he makes the mistake. He thinks it's not her room, right?
Right.
And he blunders in, and what does she do?
Scream.
And the narrator goes on, a little bit fainter now, but still very steady, you know. You know, being constant, she knows darn well that he's not going to try to impose himself on her or anything or rape her, but she got him now. And that's what Hubert said. She got you now, bud. She got you now. We caught you in her bedroom, and everybody's going to know it.
Hubert agreed that, no, that was just a mistake by the end, because he said you can have him, he goes home free.
Yeah, right, at the time. I think it's a little foggy. I can't give you an explanation, but ultimately they do marry, and maybe it comes out later in other stories, but.
And that's why, because he's such.
Yeah, I think, because of the quaint, and the quaint, moral, rules about, you know, not a single man not going into the boudoir of a married woman, day or night. You don't do that. You know, I mean,
Because this one's set in the is it antebellum or bellum? It's before the Civil War. So those protocols would have been very strictly enforced, correct?
oh yeah. It wasn't just before the Civil War. I'm old enough to say that was, my teenage years were long before birth control. Be really careful about what went on when I was courting my teenage girlfriend and her very proper parents. I was always chaperoned by her twin brother.
Wisely,
Pardon me?
wisely, no doubt.
Anyway, all very innocent. Well, I've certainly enjoyed this, and I thank you for indulging me. We spent more time on the Rose family than we should have. But I just think it's just such that it deserves that much attention. Would you like to take up with Woz a little bit as we get back, and we'll move on into what did I say? What's coming next? The Paladin in Black.
Yep.
And
Fire in the Heart.
The Fire in the Heart. Okay, quick word. Paladin in Black is about an African American guy who we know he loses his wife. And then the rest of the story is about what he does. In The Fire in the Hearth, it focuses on Lucas Beecham, who's 1/4 black, 3/4 white. I've got that right. But of course, treated as being African American, altogether African American. It's after slavery. This is not during slavery. But I find him very, very admirable character. And the story is really funny, involving the shenanigans about hunting for lost treasure, buried treasure, and this guy who comes in from the north who's going to help him out and find it. And just look at how he controls what's going on as you read that story. It's a longish story, but I think it's not hard to read. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. And thank you.